Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new catch-up review video where I can talk about several albums released earlier this year that I didn't have a chance to talk about for whatever reason, and I talk about them here instead. So yeah, let's get started with the first record I want to talk about, the newest record from Armand Hammer, Shrines. This was my first introduction to Armand Hammer, as well as both members of this duo, Billy Woods and Elucid. Never heard any of the previous material from these guys, but I heard good things about this project as well as some of their previous material, so I decided this was going to be a project worth checking out. And after giving this thing a good few listens, I'm very happy that I checked this thing out because overall this is a pretty great hip-hop release. Throughout this record, both Elucid and Billy Woods have some really great flows on these tracks. They have lots of great moments where the chemistry between the two is just really great, really natural sounding. And the lyrics here on this project are really enjoyable as well. They're very abstract, kind of dense at times too, but I think a lot of the stuff that the group is talking about here on this project is also really interesting, whether it be them talking about issues affecting black people in America currently, whether it be them diving into some stuff related more so to their personal lives, or whether it be some of the moments on this project where the framings of these issues gets to be a bit more abstract and interesting, like on the track Flavor Flav, for example, which sees the group kind of taking into account the concept of time and using this to kind of serve as this concept of which they're using to talk about other subject matters on the track through. It's a really interesting song, one of the best on this thing from a lyrical standpoint, and all the other tracks on this record do a pretty good job when it comes to having interesting stuff to say as well. Again, the style of lyrics here on this project is pretty dense and kind of abstract too, but there's a lot of stuff to really sink your teeth into and just kind of analyze and enjoy if you're into that kind of stuff. So if you like those kind of lyrics, this is certainly a record that you'll enjoy. Another aspect of this album that I really love is the instrumentals here on this thing. The style of the instrumentals here is kind of low-key, not super loud or in your face or anything like that. They're the kind of instrumentals that really allow both MCs to kind of be at the forefront of all of these tracks, and I think that's mostly a good thing considering the really dense style of lyrics here, as well as just the fantastic chemistry between the two MCs and all of that. But when you actually, pay a bit more attention to the instrumentals here, these are some really great instrumentals here on this project. I really love the kind of dark, ominous, kind of fragmented sound that a lot of these beats have to them. Again, none of the beats here are, super loud or abrasive or in your face, but I feel like when you pay a lot of attention to these beats, they have a lot to offer as well, and I think the atmosphere they create across this record is one that's consistently moody and, like I said before, kind of ominous sounding too, and I think it pairs up really nicely, not only with the sound of both MC's flows on this record, but just the general feel of a lot of the lyrics and the concepts being talked about on this record too. It all really helps tie together a lot of what the rest of this record is doing. So yeah, I feel like the instrumentals here on this record are really fantastic, one of my favorite aspects of this project overall. The features here on this record are an aspect of this thing that's also pretty consistently good, though I will say that there are a few moments on this thing, a few features where I felt like some of the artists here that I was expecting a lot from kind of let me down a little bit. For example, Earl Sweatshirt on the track, he pops up here on this thing. His feature is, it's fine, it's not bad, but at the same time I expected maybe a little bit more from him. I can kind of say the same for Quelle Chris on the track, he pops up on this thing. Again, I think his feature here is good, but at the same time I feel like it could have been maybe a little bit better too. But while there are some artists here on this thing that maybe let me down just a little bit with the quality of their features, a lot of the other artists, especially some of those that I wasn't familiar with prior to listening to this thing, they had some pretty good features here on this thing, and I feel like they fit in with the sound and the vibe of this record really nicely. In addition to that, when it comes to any complaints that I may have with this record, I don't really have many big ones, though maybe I would say that there's maybe a couple tracks here or there on this record that maybe stylistically or sonically don't really offer too much different from some of the other moments on this record that maybe sound just a little bit better. Maybe there's a couple tracks here or there that maybe just aren't the most interesting when compared to some of the best moments on this thing, but I still think that all of these songs here on this record are thoroughly enjoyable. I think they all feel really cohesive when put together in the context of this album. And they're all good songs pretty much. I don't really have many complaints when it comes to this record. And if you're a fan of kind of weird abstract hip-hop, then I think that Shrines is a record that you should certainly give a chance to, because like I said before, the rapping on this thing is really great from both MCs. The hook work on this thing is also pretty enjoyable too, not in the sense that it's, you know, super catchy or anything, but I feel like what they managed to do with some of the hooks here on this record works within this kind of weird abstract style of hip-hop. The instrumentals here on this project, as I said already, are really fantastic. The features are for the most part pretty good. So yeah, Shrines is overall a pretty great hip-hop release. Definitely check this thing out. Moving on though, the next record that I want to talk about is the new split from Panopticon and Nechochwen. This was a project that I checked out because of Panopticon's involvement. I was unfamiliar with Nechochwen and their music prior to hearing their side of the split, though. After listening to this thing in full, I'm really happy I decided to check this thing out, because not only did I like the Panopticon side of this thing, but also because I really enjoyed the Nechochwen side of this thing too. I felt like the tracks that they offered here on this thing were really enjoyable, and I definitely want to check out some of their other music too after hearing this. So I'll start by talking about the Nechochwen side of this split, which I think is really enjoyable. The group brings 4 tracks to this thing, and all 4 of these songs are really enjoyable and offer a good amount of variety as well. The style of music that these guys do is atmospheric black metal, but they managed to have a good amount of variety in that style too. Of course, you have some of the more straightforward black metal moments on this thing, but you'll also have some moments where the instrumentation is a bit more stripped back, a bit more acoustic too, giving a bit more atmosphere. There's also some moments on this thing, like for example, on the track The Mingling Waters, after the kind of acoustic intro that this track has, you get this section where it gets a bit heavier, but not really in a black metal sort of sense. It almost sounds kind of doom metal-like with how the riffs play out here at this portion of the song, and I just think it's a really cool moment on this track. It's probably one of my favorite songs on this entire split. Just a super cool moment on this thing instrumentally. And the vocals here on this project also have a lot to offer too. At points having, you know, that typical harsh black metal sound to them, but there's also some moments on this thing with some clean vocals that sound really nice as well. Overall, this side of the split is really enjoyable. Again, I think the band offers a lot of variety here in these 4 tracks. The instrumentals are really solid. There's lots of great nasty riffs across this thing too. The vocals sound fantastic as well and have a lot to offer. Overall, it's just really enjoyable. And I could say the same thing for the Panopticon side of this split too. It only offers a single track in it, but this one track is a pretty lengthy one at almost 20 minutes in length, and there's just so much going on here in this song. It is a massive song, not only in the sense that it's long, but also in the sense that there's just so much packed into it. The song itself is about Panopticon, the sole member of this group, Austin Lund, his son, who had a rare heart condition, and a lot of the medical procedures and surgeries that followed the discovery of this heart condition. There's no actual lyrics for this song that are posted online. However, on the Bandcamp release page for this individual song, there is a pretty lengthy description of the background behind this track, and I highly recommend you read that little description, because it does provide a good amount of context for this song, and it just helps further, I guess, illuminate what this song is trying to accomplish. And yeah, some pretty, you know, heavy stuff being talked about there. If I will say that, fortunately, there is a happy ending to this particular story as you read what's written there, and that's a good thing to know while listening to this song. But the actual experience of listening to this track itself, again, it's really heavy, it's really emotional, and again, like I said before, there's so much going on here on this track. Instrumentally, there's a lot going on here on this track. There's moments on this song that have a more straightforward black metal sound to them. There's moments here on this track where that sound is stripped back a bit more to some of the folkier atmospheric instrumentation Panopticon has played around with before. Really, the sound of this song takes a lot of those sounds and ideas that Panopticon has done on previous records and kind of condenses it down into this one track. And I love how these different sections and sounds are used here in this song to, you know, represent these different phases of, you know, this whole experience that I described earlier, as talked about in the Bandcamp description for the release of this song. Talking about those moments of anger and frustration, those moments of sorrow, it's all captured here in this song perfectly through the sound of this track and all the different phases that this song goes through. The vocals here on this track are also really fantastic. Again, I love how much variety you get here and how nicely the vocals pair up with the instrumental to this track and how nicely they fit the concept of this song. You can really hear the pain and the sorrow and the anger at various points in this track depending on what the song is trying to do, and I just really love that about the vocal performance here. It fits the song excellently. Overall, I think that Rune's Heart is a really fantastic track, one of the best songs Panopticon has written so far. Just really a masterpiece of a song. The instrumental here is fantastic. There's a ton to really enjoy here from that perspective. The vocal performance here is great too. The concept behind the song is fantastic. The whole thing is, like I said, one of the best Panopticon songs to date, and certainly one of my favorite songs of 2020 so far. And really just the split as a whole is a really great project too, regardless of which artist you're talking about. Both of them bring their A game to this thing and put out some pretty enjoyable tracks here. So definitely give this split a listen if you're a fan of atmospheric black metal. You will not regret it. Moving on though, the next project I want to talk about is yet another split, this time from Panopticon and Aerial Ruin. Again, I checked this project out because of Panopticon's involvement. I was unfamiliar with the other artists, but I ended up enjoying this thing as a whole quite a bit, though I will say it isn't quite as good as the split I was just talking about. I still think, regardless though, this is an enjoyable project for what it is. Despite the fact that Panopticon is yet again involved with this split, the sound of this project is very different than that of the split I was just talking about. The sound of this one is more folk-oriented, pretty much straightforward all the way through. This thing is just folk. There's no black metal here whatsoever, and I really don't think that's all that much of a bad thing here, especially when compared to the last split I was talking about, which for the most part was just pretty much black metal through and through. I think this is a nice change of pace compared to that split, and overall I found the sound of this thing to be pretty enjoyable coming from both artists here. For the Aerial Ruin part of this split, I think it's pretty solid. I think the instrumentals here on the side of this split are really great. I feel like the first couple of tracks in particular on this side of the split are some of the best that the entire split has to offer when it comes to the memorability of the lyrics and the vocal performances and the instrumentals. I will say that towards the middle portion of this side of the split, it does kind of drop off a little bit in terms of quality for me. Not in the sense that the tracks are bad, more so that they're just maybe a little bit more forgettable when compared to, say, like the first couple of tracks on this thing, which I feel are some of the best here. But yeah, overall I feel like this side of the split is still really enjoyable through and through. And when it comes to the Panopticon side of the split, I also think it's pretty enjoyable. Again, because I feel like the instrumentals are really solid. I feel like the vocal performances here are really enjoyable as well. The only other complaint I really have with this side of the split, the Panopticon side that is that once again, towards the middle of this side of the split that is, some of the tracks are probably some of the weakest on this side of the split. The couple of tracks that are actually covers towards the middle of the split aren't bad tracks per se, but when compared to some of the first track on the side of the split and the last track, they just don't really stand out as being some of the most interesting that this thing has to offer. And I also feel like the writing style of the lyrics is, noticeably different when compared to the style of lyrics on the first and last track in the side of the split. Not to the point where it's a super big detriment to the split or anything, but yeah, I do feel like these couple of tracks towards the middle are maybe some of the weaker moments on this thing. They are still good songs, though I will say I still think that they fit overall with the general sound of this thing. And when it comes to the original songs you get here from Panopticon, they're still really enjoyable as well, especially the final track on this side of the split, The Pit, which is just a really solid Panopticon track. My favorite song probably on this entire split as a whole. Overall, I think this is a pretty enjoyable split. Again, It's not as good as the one I was talking about before, because I feel like there are some moments on this thing with some more noticeable blemishes to them, but still, I think this thing is enjoyable. There's lots of really good tracks on this thing, and I think the overall sound of this thing is also pretty consistent too. Not only when it comes to the individual, sides of the split here with each respective artist, but also just the project as a whole has a nice cohesive sound to it. I feel it's a good pairing of styles here when it comes to both artists involved, and I think both complement each other quite nicely. They fit into the same sort of style of music nicely, but they do have their own distinct qualities that makes each of them distinct and enjoyable. So yeah, if you like this style of folky music, then I recommend you give this thing a listen. Again, I don't think it's as good as the split I was talking about before. I don't think this is going to be like one of my favorite releases of the year or anything, but still, it's a worthwhile listen if you like these artists and if you like this kind of music. Moving on though, the next record that I want to talk about is the newest full-length album from Royce the 5'9", the Allegory. Royce the 5'9" is a rapper that I've always felt like is a really good rapper, but a lot of times when it comes to his full-length projects, as well as just individual tracks at points, lots of times I feel like I'm left a bit cold, mostly because while he is a really good rapper, sometimes his ability to get instrumentals that I enjoy, as well as craft subject matter that I really find myself engaged with, hasn't always happened in the past. But with the release of his last album, The Book of Ryan, back in 2018, while I don't think that's a perfect album or anything, I found myself enjoying that project quite a bit. It's probably my favorite Royce the 5'9" record, and one thing I really enjoyed about that record, and probably the thing that made me enjoy that record as much as I did, was the fact that there was a consistent concept there on that project, and that concept gave Royce a lot of things to talk about that I found to be pretty interesting. So coming into the new record from him, I was excited to see if he'd continue with a similar level of quality as he showed on the Book of Ryan, but unfortunately here with the Allegory that isn't really the case, but for reasons that are a bit different, because funnily enough, I do feel like this is another really consistent project from him from a conceptual standpoint. Conceptually here on this record, he's talking about issues relating to being a black person in America, things like racism, police brutality, violence, things like that, the way money affects the black community. And he's pretty consistent when it comes to talking about those issues here on that project. That's one thing I can't really fault him for here on this record. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that this is a more focused record than the Book of Ryan was, because that album did have a few tracks here or there that did seem a little bit off topic, whereas here, with the exception of maybe one or two songs, it's pretty consistent. But my big issues here with this record don't really come from that standpoint of things. It's more so because there's just a lot of other smaller issues that end up piling up with this record that just lead to this thing being really unenjoyable in my opinion. First and foremost is probably the lyrics here on this thing. The thing is, when Royce is talking about black issues here on this project as they relate to him, for the most part, things end up being pretty, passable at the very least. I think he does a decent enough job talking about these things. I mean, sure, I can say that some of the subject matter that he tackles and the way that he goes about doing it is stuff that's been done before and said before, probably a bit better from some other artists I can think of, but that's not the biggest problem in the world, especially when you may have, rapping and production that maybe helps, make things a bit more enjoyable. But there are some moments here on this project when Royce maybe tries talking about some things that don't really relate to him specifically. Starts talking about other marginalized groups where things start to become a little bit troublesome, I guess, in the lyrics for one reason or another, and this happens at various points on the record. For example, there are a few moments on this project that seem maybe a little bit homophobic. Like, for example, on the track Upside Down, for example, he opens up his first verse kind of talking about gay people trying to get with straight people, and then like straight people trying to get with gay women, and I really don't know what he's talking about here, mostly because it doesn't really seem like it makes much sense. I'm not really sure how many gay people out there would want to get with a straight person, or vice versa. It doesn't really seem like something that happens all that much. Doesn't really seem like something that really exists. So I'm not really sure what he's talking about here on this track. It just seems like a really odd way to kick off his verse here that probably didn't need to start like this. Why does Royce care so much on this track about what gay people are doing? It doesn't really seem to affect him personally all that much, so why he's bringing it up just seems kind of strange. And also, in addition to that, you have on the track Thou Shall, a lyric not from Royce himself, but rather the feature artist on this thing, Kid Vicious, where he has a line about how men shouldn't be described as petite. Again, some kind of not good readings you could probably get from a line like that. There's also a fair bit of misogyny present on the project too, which I guess isn't the most shocking thing in the world, but it's something that's made a bit more prominent on this release, considering the more socially aware approach Royce is supposed to be taking here on this release, and especially considering that there are moments on this project which almost seem to go against this too, like on the interlude on this thing, Miss Grace, where he's kind of at a point on this thing, or rather, the track is kind of talking about women not being degraded in a way, but it's kind of weird that other points on the record that just seem to contradict this. It almost kind of seems like Royce is more willing to maybe stand up for women if that particular woman happens to be like a daughter figure, as referenced in that interlude I mentioned before, or just some other family member or something like that. And while I guess that's not a bad thing when taken on its own, if you're not really doing those kind of things for all women in general, it doesn't really end up meaning much. Though probably the most troublesome bit of lyricism here on this record are the points on this record where Royce takes a very explicit anti-vax standpoint, and I can't think of a year worse to take an anti-vax standpoint than 2020 of all years, but the lyrics here on this project, even, devoid of context in the year 2020, are really bad. I mean, there's multiple points here on this project where he pretty much just straight up says that vaccines gave his son autism, which it's a thing that's already been disproven. It's already proven that's something that's not real. Vaccines did not give your son autism. It just did not happen that way. I'm sorry to let you know. Your lyrics here are just false. Completely wrong. Vaccines do not cause autism. And I could almost understand what he's trying to get at here with a lyric like this, considering how much on this record he's talking about, the black community. And I can kind of see the perspective of the black community being, cautious or afraid of certain medical related things, considering how terribly the black community has been treated by white people, and considering the medical industry is, a pretty white industry historically speaking. I can understand almost what he's getting at if he was trying to speak in more vague terms, but no, he's just literally saying here on this record, vaccines gave his son autism, which again is proven to be false. Not to mention Royce's framing here in these lyrics of autism being this super terrible thing is also not a really good thing either, because autism isn't this super awful thing. People with autism are just human people who also deserve respect and all of those things too, because it's not some awful thing to have necessarily, and the way it's portrayed here is just not super great too. And just the fact that this message here, this very blatant misinformation, is shown on this album at multiple points. Like I said, it pops up in a couple of tracks here as well as one of the interlude tracks on this thing too. The fact that it's portrayed as this very truthful thing on this supposed socially conscious record is really bad, because I'm sure it's just going to end up spreading misinformation to people who maybe don't know that vaccines are already proven not to cause autism, and that's just, really bad, especially considering the framing of this record. Moving away from a lot of the more blatantly troublesome moments in the lyrics here, a lot of the other lyrics and messages here on this project aren't always the greatest. Like, for example, you have the track Perspective, which is a skit narrated by Eminem, where he kind of starts off talking about, hip-hop and how it's kind of like this melting pot, in a sense, of culture, and it's something that exposes, white audiences to black music and black culture, or maybe vice versa. And the first thing I think when I'm first hearing this track is, okay, he's kind of like setting this up to kind of frame himself, considering that he's, probably the biggest artist in hip-hop, this primarily black art form, despite the fact that he's a white person. I can kind of see what he was trying to go for at the start, but that's not actually what he was trying to go for, or at least I don't think it was, because he just kind of ends up going off on these tangents that don't really go anywhere here on this speech of his. And I mean, it's not like he says anything that's like wrong per se in this speech. He just doesn't really end up saying much of anything, and it's just kind of odd. There's also a lot of really tiresome moments on this thing where Royce is just going after lots of newer rappers, not really by name or anything, just, kind of going after the mumble rappers and all of that. And I'm just so tired and over that at this point. I just can't help but roll my eyes every time he's talking about this. Because honestly, most of the rappers he's talking about there probably do not care at all what he thinks about them. So I already talked about the lyrics quite a bit now. What about everything else here on this project? Well, I will say that the rapping from Royce on this thing is pretty solid. It's probably the best part of this thing consistently. Like I said before, he is a really good rapper, and he certainly showcases that here on this project. When it comes to his features here on this thing, for the most part, they're pretty decent too. Not really any features that blew me away on this thing or anything, but, there are some rap features on this thing that are pretty solid. There are some that are maybe kind of mediocre, but, for the most part, I didn't really have too many problems with most of them. Instrumentally, this project is pretty mediocre in my opinion. None of the beats on this thing are really bad per se, but at the same time, none of them are really great or really all that good either. I mean, they fit the tracks, I guess. They just kind of exist for the most part. I don't really have much of a strong opinion on most of them. Another thing about this album, though, that I really just do not like is how lengthy this thing is. It just feels super bloated. Feels like there's just way too many tracks on this thing. It just kind of goes on and on and on, and yeah, it's not the most interesting project to listen to, I guess is what I'm saying, even when ignoring some of the lyrics on this thing not really being all that great. While the rapping here on this thing is pretty solid, the fact that the instrumentals tend to be pretty mediocre, the fact that the album seems to be as long as it is, and the fact that the features tend to just be pretty okay for the most part, leads to this thing just feeling like a chore to get through. So overall, the Allegory is a pretty bad album in my opinion, again, mostly because of the lyrics, because even despite the fact that there are some lyrics on this thing that are pretty decent, the fact that there's also moments on this thing where lyrically there are some kind of troublesome moments there. These troublesome moments, while they don't take up the majority of the lyrics here, they do completely undermine a lot of the core message of this project, whether it be the anti-vax lines that have disinformation in them and just completely destroy any credibility this record really has as being, socially aware, or, some of the homophobic or misogynistic moments in the lyrics here, which don't really fit in considering, when talking about the black community and black struggle. I would have to guess that would include, black gay people, black women as well, but this project seems to suggest otherwise. This record just ends up being a chore to sit through, like I said before, even despite the fact that, like I said, the rapping is pretty decent for the most part. It's just an unpleasant record to listen through, and, despite the fact that I liked Book of Ryan quite a bit, this project just, despite being more focused than that record, did not live up to the expectations that I had for it. So yeah, I would say avoid this record unless you're like a really big fan or something. But considering that this album's been out for a few months already, I'm guessing if you're a big fan, you've already heard this thing. But yeah, that sums up all the records I want to talk about here today. So feel free to drop your own thoughts on these records in the comment section down below. Everything I said here was just my own personal opinion, so if you have a different opinion, that's perfectly fine. Feel free to leave a like on this video as well. And while you're down there, make sure you also subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, discussion videos, list videos, things like that. Thank you guys for watching this once again, and stay golden.